You are listening to The Main Phase, episode 103, a Magic the Gathering podcast bringing you relevant information about your favorite game. In this episode, we discuss how we judge the playability of cards in Standard, and about the current situation with the artist boycott starting next year at MagicFest. Stay tuned. Hello, this is Debo from Land Say Go, and you are listening to The Main Phase, a Magic the Gathering podcast bringing you up-to-date information about your favorite game. I'm joined today with our co-host, Jeremy. How are you doing today, JB?
I'm doing good today, Debo. Today we're going to be talking about how we judge the playability of cards in Standard and about the controversy and the boycott surrounding MagicFest by the artists and the Magic community. So, how to determine a card's playability. We thought that maybe this was something that we should bring up in the podcast. Certainly something that we don't think is maybe covered as adequately as it could be.
So in Standard, and actually really in any format, there are several different types of cards that you need to be aware of. There's going to be the staples, something that everyone's going to gravitate towards. There's also going to be the playable cards, the ones that are good and have good effects, but aren't nearly as good as the staples are. You'll also find that there are sleepers. There are cards in there that seem good, but when you try to play it within your format, it's just not clicking. And then we also have trap cards. So these cards are ones that have a flashy effect, but for some reason, it just won't work. Or it takes a lot of setup to work. And then we also have the unplayables.
Yeah. And there's plenty of those in almost every set, right? I mean, if you're talking about Standard meta, there's going to be cards that are just unplayable.
Yep.
If you're trying to be competitive in any capacity, there are going to be cards that will not make it into a list. And if they do, you're likely setting yourself in that tier 3, tier 4 category if you're leaning on some of those unplayable cards.
Yep. All right, so let's go ahead and just jump right into the Standard staple. So a good way to start really looking at the quality of a card is by using what's called the vanilla test.
Okay.
And for those who don't know, the vanilla test is basically you look at the converted mana cost, and the power and toughness should basically be equal to that converted mana cost for it to pass the vanilla test.
So specifically creatures are what we're vanilla testing.
Correct. So if it's a 5 mana cost creature, you would expect that creature would have a 5 power and 5 toughness.
Sure.
Right? Or if it's a bear, it's a 2/2 for 2. That passes the vanilla test.
Mm-hmm.
Now, when you start looking at these cards, you also have to look at, for the staples, the colors that are within the mana cost.
Mm-hmm.
So if, let's say, it's say 3 colorless and 1 blue, and then it's going to be a 4/4 powered creature, that's amazing, right? If you start looking and it has instead 1 of every color, and it's a 5/5, now it's a little bit of an issue because it's going to be a lot harder to cast that card than it would be if it was, say, 4 in a red. Or 4 and a white.
I think sometimes, the history of Magic has certainly showed us that in the event that we actually have a creature that is 1 of each color, if it is in fact a 5/5, it has an incredible ability to go along with it, right?
Yep.
Let's go to Sliver Queen, 7/7, spits out tokens. It is a tremendously powerful card. Progenitus, 2 of each color, right? Wooburg, and he has a 10/10 protection from everything, right? So that's a little bit of an outlier, right? Mm-hmm. I think let's go back to the Standard meta here. Let's look at a card like Wrath Capuchin. All your historic cards gain flash, the ability to flash. He flashes himself. It's 2 blue-white for a 3/3.
Yep.
Right.
So when you start looking at the abilities that these cards have, once they start tacking on keywords or a flashy ability, well, then it's okay on the vanilla test if the power and toughness starts creeping down a little bit, assuming that the power level of the keyword or the ability that they're putting on is an equivalent amount of power to what they're reducing from the card. So, let's take, for instance, Wrath Capuchin, since you brought him up. So really, to make him a powerful, say, rare, you would want it
Which he's not. He's an uncommon.
He's an uncommon.
Yeah.
You would want it to be a 4 power, 4/4 with flash that gives all of your historic cards flash. That sounds amazing.
Yeah.
Right?
It's a tremendously powerful card.
Right.
Yeah.
And so when you're looking at your rarity, so it bumped it down to uncommon. Okay, so now he's split colors. So now he's 2 blue-white.
Mm-hmm.
And then to really balance the card with the flash ability, plus giving your things flash, they had to bring him down to a 3/3. So is he a 3/3 or a 2/2?
Yeah, it's a 3/3.
3/3? That's pretty good. So even then, I still don't know if he would be considered a staple. For me, a staple would be something like maybe Sinister Sabotage.
The new meta counterspell. It's in everything.
Right.
That runs counterspell's main board.
Right.
It's in everything.
And because WotC has pretty much said that 3 mana counterspells are the going rate. Okay?
Yeah.
So now we're kind of going a little bit away from creatures, but so the vanilla test for, say, a counterspell is 3 mana counter target spell.
Well, 3 mana is the going rate for a counterspell at common.
At common, right.
To counter target spell. We've got cancel at common. That is what they call counterspell. Counterspell is 2 blue. But yes, it's 3 mana for a counterspell. But cancel gives us nothing but the countering of target spell. The Sinister Sabotage is bumped up to uncommon rarity because you get the Surveil trigger. Right?
Yep. So you got that Surveil trigger, and that Surveil trigger helps fix the top card of your library or fuel your graveyard. So that ability right there, tacking that on to the counter target spell for 3 mana, makes this card a greater power than the vanilla test. And because control it has so many good pieces right now in the meta, something like Sinister Sabotage, it's considered a staple because if you're going to be running blue, you're going to be running that card to help fix your library plus stop your opponent from playing something. Another good card to consider for a staple would be something like Carnage Tyrant. So here's on the flip side, right? So now you have an uncounterable 7/6 for 6 mana. So this is going to be something with hexproof.
Yeah.
So if you're going to look at at just the vanilla test, so it's a 7/6 for 6 mana. That alone is above the going rate. Now you add hexproof. Now it's even better from what it was before. Plus, you now have uncounterable on top of that. So the power level of this card is just skyrocketed.
Trample.
And it has trample. So the power level of this card, it has skyrocketed, and it answers a problem that is within the meta for this type of a card, namely counterspell control. So the other thing to look at for these standard staples is they have to have an immediate effect, an immediate impact when you cast them. So something like Carnage Tyrant, the immediate impact is it's going to resolve, and they're not going to be able to single target remove it.
Yeah, Carnage Tyrant for me was a response to the domination of Torrential Gearhulk in the meta. Keep in mind that Carnage Tyrant was in development, right? Ixalan, under whatever its code name was, bacon and eggs, I can't remember, spaghetti and meatballs, whatever they call it. It's always something that has to do with food. Whatever that code name of Ixalan was, Carnage Tyrant was in development by the time that Torrential Gearhulk was in the standard meta. Did Carnage Tyrant have an immediate impact on the meta? Yes. It saw play as soon as it was available in standard. People were trying to figure out ways to get to 6 mana to launch a Carnage Tyrant. Carnage Tyrant actually, in the months following the release of Ixalan, resided in the sideboard, right? And I think the question that we have to ask with each of these as well as we're going through the vanilla test, et cetera, Debo, is does rarity matter, right? Does it actually matter to what we're doing in terms of vanilla testing cards, deciding an immediate impact of a card? Does the rarity matter? And the answer is yes, it does, I think. In some ways, because you will never find cards with stacked abilities like Carnage Tyrant has in anything outside of a mythic classification, which makes them less common in packs, which makes them more desirable, which drives prices up, right? I think you... Go ahead.
Now, here's where you and I might disagree, where at least in terms of naming a staple, I don't think rarity does matter. I think really it's the effect that the card has to the metagame that really affects whether or not it's a staple. Now, whether or not the card is expensive, well, that's a different story.
Well, you can argue that a majority of the staples that we actually find in the standard meta are mythic or better. The cards that seem to almost always make it into decks that people build around are rares and mythics, right? Carnage Tyrant saw plenty of play, main board play in those Golgari decks at GP Milwaukee, right? But I'm gonna align with you on that. Does rarity matter for a card to be a staple in any particular format? No. It matters how well it fits into a deck archetype. And that deck archetype is crafted by the interactions between those cards. As we all know, your favorite format, well, I'd argue to say that it's probably not your favorite format, but it's up there in terms of Pauper. There are interactions between those cards, and they're all simply common. By the way, your most recent article on Pauper at lancego.com was really nice this week.
Thank you.
If you have an opportunity to get out there and read that, show us some support on the website. We could use some interactions and feedback from the community at large.
And it also, just to side note on that, we always love to hear from you guys, whether it be if you have a deck list that you want us to take a look at, or even if you just have a comment on, like, say you disagree with us. That's totally cool. We want to know why we're wrong about something or why we're right. Just give us drop us a line. You're able to write comments on all of our blog posts, and we look forward to hearing from you.
Join the community for free.
Mm-hmm.
So back to the standard staples. Yes, we got Sinister Sabotage. We got cards like Carnage Tyrant. But what about Teferi?
So Teferi, he also has, I would argue, a very immediate impact. Mm-hmm. So when he enters the battlefield, you maintain priority.
Until you activate him.
Until you activate him.
Mm-hmm.
So you at least get one activation from him. That is an immediate impact.
As with all Planeswalkers.
Right.
Yeah.
So with Teferi, what also makes him a staple is blue-white is exceptionally strong right now. Even before the next set where blue-white's going to get even more pieces.
Yeah, blue-white's leaning itself towards Jeskai because you have to have some substantial control to really kind of fire that off. But Teferi fits well into Esper decks, some of the outlying fringe Esper decks. Jeskai is a very straightforward archetype right now because we've got the availability of Sulfur Falls, we've got Steam Vents. But certainly as we get Hallowed Fountain in the next set, you could expect Teferi to continue to remain where he's at. That control archetype would become more powerful, but that there's going to be additional answers on the outside of that. Generally, the combination of red and black, from a historical perspective in the game of Magic, has a way of very swiftly and accurately dealing with powerful creatures and powerful planeswalkers.
So another thing that we'll be able to see, and this kind of leads us into like our playables. Right.
Yeah.
Playables are also going to be our sideboard cards. It's going to be the rares and mythics that, if left alone, will control the game.
Just a couple more staples before we move on to the playables, if I could. Let me list these quickly because they're bouncing around in my head right now, right? Mm-hmm. I think Aurelia is one of those standard staples right now that'll continue to be a build around. History of Benalia. What are some others?
Vraska's Contempt.
Yeah, Vraska's Contempt is up there. What else?
Rekindling Phoenix.
Rekindling Phoenix is up there. What's the new Loxodon again? Anyway, the one that taps and convokes everything. He's in a deck that's sitting in the other room right now in my build room, but I can't remember what his name is right now.
Yeah.
Okay, so back to the playables.
Yep. So the playables are going to be cards that you'll probably find in your sideboard. You'll also find them in your main deck, but they're the cards that will take over the game if they're not answered immediately. So cards like Lyra, which used to be a previous staple, but there has since been enough answers to where she's kind of just become playable.
I think that she kind of supplements Teferi now. You're right. She's playable, totally playable.
And then this card kind of actually took me by surprise. This was one that I thought was going to be a little bit more of a trap, but it's Thief of Insanity. That one turned out to be playable.
Yeah, seeing a lot of play. Mm-hmm. You know, Saffron Olive really kind of put out that quasi-duplicate Dimir style deck that's using the Thief of Insanity to really kind of run havoc Gonti style.
Right.
He's kind of the replacement for Gonti. You need some kind of effect where you can manipulate your opponent's deck.
Another one would be Nicol Bolas, the flipping planeswalker.
The Ravager?
The Ravager.
I think he's still seeing a fair amount of play, but certainly not build-arounds.
Right. So, but the reason why I think he's now just playable, he kind of dropped down, was because they printed cards like a Johnny's Last Stand and a Nullhide Ferox. So giving your opponent free things when you cast your spell is not that great.
Not that great, no.
So that's why I kind of bumped him down to just playable, although he is still, if left alone, he will control the game, and he'll eventually flip into a planeswalker, and if you cannot remove him, he will win the game by himself.
He is playable, and he is a card I like to play.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
So, JB, what are some other cards that you would consider to be playable right now?
Well, I think, losing a lot of what was happening in the Kaladesh block kind of dwindled some of those really exciting mono blue artifact decks with Psymaster Thopterist. That deck archetype kind of went poof. Right? It's gone. We no longer have the Aetherflux Reservoir to be able to combo off and kind of egg our way to a 50-point damage scenario. We don't have the ability to use a Paradoxical Outcome to refill our hands with a bunch of eggs, or even decreased casting cost artifacts to be able to drop them all down, multiplicatively enhance the amount of mana that we have. So there becomes an event horizon with the deck so far. Is he still playable? I think so. He's a great token generator. He's an extremely powerful card.
Got a fat Fat Butt is a 1/4 for free.
Yeah, he's a great card.
Mhm.
He's maybe a little above the rarity curve. He certainly would be if he was a 2/4, right?
Yep.
Certainly be well above it, but the rate at which he generates tokens and could still potentially generate tokens in the right deck, in the right build, but we're missing some key spells. The ability to really kind of fire off with his old archetype, that's gone. I think Karn has moved into a playable status now.
Yep. Versus a staple.
Yeah.
And even with Psy Master Thopterist, you kind of bring up a good point that he lost support.
Yeah.
Right. So with the playables, you'll find that they're good, but you don't have the proper support to really make them a staple. And even with Psy, I would even consider him right now a sleeper more than a playable, mainly because we've lost so much of the artifacts that he's almost like a feel-bad play right now because there's just not enough to build around him. Now, last standard, when we had Kaladesh, he was a staple. Like I would consider him to be on that cusp between playable and staple. Right there.
So Psy, for me, right now fits beautifully into, again, a mono blue deck that kind of plays a control thema in the sense that you can load it full of counter spells. And there's a deck that I've been thinking about here, and I'll go ahead and spoil it. I might write an article on this in the coming weeks, but Psy is still incredibly useful in terms of just buffering or cluttering the battlefield in terms of having a board presence. And he's really best played with cards now like Treasure Map, like Thematic Compass, like Fountain of Renewal, which is, again, more draw card engine and just more tempo, and Karn. And you kind of jam all of that together, right? You have the opportunity to really make an impact with a deck list like that, and he becomes playable. As far as a sleeper, I think once you kind of enter that sleeper category, we're waiting on additional things to show up in additional sets, and maybe before he rolls out, we get an opportunity to kind of play him again in a meaningful way. But Karn, I think, is starting to slip into that playable category, not necessarily a staple. Certainly when we had the opportunity to combine both Karn and Chandra, and if you'll remember, we had a point in Standard not too long ago where we could combine Chandra and Karn. Right? We were seeing incredible things taking place with Sunbird's Invocation, with Azur's Gateway. That tends to be the way that Standard goes. They intentionally design these sets to replace and outpace and give people cause to buy more powerful cards classified by the meta. Not necessarily that the overarching or 50,000 foot view of the game makes one card better than the other, but the existing combinations making an existing 60 out of the current Standard pool becomes forced almost in terms of support, going back to what you were saying.
Another thing with Karn, the reason why he, at least in my opinion, that he dropped down to playable from staple is we've also got more answers to him now. So that's another thing that will drop these cards from these various sections.
What kind of answers?
So we have that new Goblin that can just blow him up for 1 mana. We've already had things like Vraska's Contempt and Sorcerer's Spyglass. And then we were also seeing other decks that can go wide enough to just take him out with a board full of creatures. It was during a time when we had a lot of artifacts to really work with him, as well as a meta that didn't go nearly as wide as it can right now. Karn was one of those cards that could fit into any deck because it's colorless. It would draw you cards, and then it would stay there for a while. But now there's just enough answers to where...
I guess I really didn't pick up that Goblin Crater Maker could destroy a non-land colorless permanent and just nuke Karn.
Yep.
It's interesting that this weenie little goblin could be something that would destroy the Scion of Urzon.
Right?
Right? It's kind of silly.
Yeah.
I didn't pick up on that.
Another card right now that is considered playable versus staple is actually another mythic, March of Multitudes.
Yeah.
So this one is kind of interesting because it's a mythic. It seems like it should just be jammed in every green-white deck that's available right now.
Yeah.
But it's seeing very little play. Like it's seeing some, but not a ton of play.
It's really a fringe card, and another one that I really expected to see along that very same Selesnya line is Tristani. And there are decks, the big Tristani decks, there are Selesnya decks that are in the competitive scene right now that are doing some really, really good work. And they run Tristani 2 copies of her main board, but she is just playable as opposed to being a staple or something that's dominating. And I think that that's what we're saying is that staples are the cards that are highly desirable. Everybody's playing them because they're dominating the competitive scene. Let's move on to sleepers. Let's kind of talk about that a little bit. The sleeper cards, those are the cards that I think that you and I tend to build around frequently. Debo. We're thumbing through our rare binders. We're looking for something that we haven't played because F&M is about the beauty of creativity. It's about the fun of the game for us. It's about seeing if we can go Johnny some wins. For me, oftentimes, it's spike some wins using some fringe cards or cards that maybe they don't see, but I tend to kind of follow that competitive line a little bit more.
Right.
Walk me through a couple that are just at the top of your mind. Top of the hat here.
Sure. And before we delve into that, just to kind of piggyback off what you were saying, you're right that the sleepers are definitely where that Johnny is. And so are some of the trap cards too.
Yeah.
So the trap is going to be more of the jank,
Mm-hmm.
and the sleepers are going to be a little bit more of the Johnny.
Yeah.
But some of the cards off the top of my head that are sleepers right now, Angrath is one, the 5-mana Angrath. He's a good card. He can do a lot of good. There's just not enough support for him right now.
Yeah.
And I think that'll change once we get Rakdos in the next set. Another one is Multani. So we have this really cool buildup of this lands deck.
I want him to be good.
Yeah.
As soon as Dominaria came out, I bought 4 copies of him. It was
Me
the
too.
first mythic that I fleshed out.
Yep. And we have Scapeshift in the meta right now, which is also a sleeper, at least in my opinion. We have Crucible of Worlds. We have this cool shaping up lands deck with no real good payoff except for Multani, and him by himself just isn't good enough.
Yeah.
So
That's true.
we need some other pieces in there to really make that lands.
Do you know what
work.
Crucible of Worlds needs right now in Standard? Fast Bond and Zuran Orb. So we can sacrifice our lands for 2 life, pay 1 life and bring it back, and we can play any number of those that we want and go infinite with our life total. That seems completely balanced to me.
Completely. Well, the closest thing we have right now is the 4-mana Vraska, where you can plus her, sacrifice a land,
Bring it right back.
draw a card, gain a life, bring it right back.
Yeah.
So that's probably the closest that we have right now. Or we can also just do silly shenanigans with Scapeshift and the 3-mana dinosaur that allows you to play.
We're going to see some
lands.
kind of Maze's End card in the next set, Debo.
Yep, either that or the set after that.
You think so? I mean, with a card like Circuitous Root, we've got to be able to get there pretty quickly. It states that we can 2-gate
Yep.
search and pop them into the battlefield, right? There they are.
Yep.
Something's got to be happening.
We've also got the guild 2 and a blue, 2 and a blue enchantment, guild's forum, something like that.
Yeah, that's
where it says whenever a gate enters the battlefield, draw a card, and then
Yeah.
when that enchantment enters the battlefield, you draw a card for each gate you control.
And a Simic Shell seems like it'd be really good for that style of deck,
Mhm.
right? And I'm also hoping that as far as clones go, we see another Biovisionary. I loved that card. It's such a quarter rare, but that's the kind of card that I really freak out about.
Actually, we're probably going to see something like that because we do see a lot of clones in standard right now.
There are a lot of clones,
Mhm.
a lot of really good clones
Yep.
in Standard right now.
So getting back to the sleepers, Charnel Troll right now, I think I'm saying that right, is kind of a
Charnel
sleeper.
Troll.
Yeah.
I want that card to be good, but it sucks right now.
Right now. Yeah, I think it needs a little bit more graveyard support for it to really shine.
Yeah.
And then we'll kind of move on a little bit to the trap cards. But I see here in sleepers that you marked down Omnispell Adept.
Yeah.
I find that card to be a trap card.
That card is a sleeper because it doesn't have the support yet. But when they print a card like that in Guilds of Ravnica, and it is incredibly powerful when you see a card like that. 2 colorless and a blue to cast an instant or sorcery from your hand
Mm-hmm.
without paying its mana cost.
And it circumvents the timing restrictions.
Correct. We do not have what it wants us to cast. We can throw a whole bunch of spice in there if we want to. We can cast a Star of Extinction with it and kill it.
Or that Apex of Power.
Apex of Power, which I really think is yet to be tapped.
Yep.
Of course, we've seen some goofy decks from some popular streamers out there with, some uses of the Apex of Power, but none of it really fires accurately.
So here's the reason why I think it's a trap card.
Go into it.
So I know it's got a splashy effect. But remember what I said about trap cards at the very beginning. Trap cards have a splashy effect.
Yeah.
But
Shiny.
it's a little bit overcosted, which is a good...
How's it overcosted? 3 mana to cast any instant or sorcery without
It's a
paying?
5-mana. It's a 5-mana spell. So 5 mana. It enters the battlefield. It has to wait a turn before you can use its ability
That's why I'm saying
recast them.
there's not the support there for it yet.
Right, but it's the fact that you have to wait. It doesn't have an immediate.
We can go
impact.
heck or high water on this. Okay, we can really get into Omnispell Adept. You said you wanted to move on to traps. I tell you what, here's what we're going to do. Why don't we
I
save this
consider it a
discussion?
trap, though.
Why don't we save this discussion for sleeper or trap, and that's what we'll name the deck once we have the support for it. Okay, let's promise the listener right now that that's exactly what we're going to do.
Okay.
Okay.
So other
Explain why it's a trap card, though, before we move on. I don't want to leave it that closed.
Sure. So the reason why I consider it a trap card is because it doesn't immediately affect the board.
Okay.
So it enters the battlefield. It's overcosted at 5 mana for like a 2/3.
Sure.
And then you have to wait an entire turn before you can use its ability. A 2/3 dies very easily to spells like Lightning Strike.
Yeah.
Right.
Necrotic Wound.
Mm-hmm. So now you have to wait a full turn, hoping it doesn't die.
Mm-hmm.
And then if it survives, then you get to circumvent your timing restrictions and your mana costs for the Omnispell Adept.
Maybe Omnispell Adept is not a card that is meant to be played in Standard.
Yep. And that's I think you're right on right there. I think it's more of a commander card.
Yeah.
Right. So
and that's okay too.
This is an interesting point to talk about. Currently, we're talking about Standard as the format. Well, if we then move to other formats, some of these cards that are traps could become staples. Some of these cards that are sleepers could have all the support in the world.
Okay, so I think I'm walking with you now,
Mm-hmm.
Debo. I think I'm understanding what you're saying by trap cards. You're saying cards like Admiral Beckett Brass.
Yep.
You're saying yes, but I threw that out there because I thought I was right. Why am I right?
So the reason why you're right about Admiral Beckett Brass is because it appears that it has a lot of support, right? Because we just had a pirate set.
Doesn't it though? Grixis Pirates could be a thing.
Well, the problem is if you look at her abilities, it seems flashy, right? You deal damage with 3 pirates, you get to steal something. That sounds amazing.
Yeah.
The problem is can you actually keep your pirates on the board at the moment to be able to attack in with 3 pirates and steal something?
Let alone her, because she's just a 3/3.
Yep.
And dies to Lightning Strike.
Yep.
And dies to Necrotic Wound.
Yep.
Okay.
And she also, and she has cool effects like pumping your pirates and things like that. But she's difficult to cast. She's 1 in Grixis. Like you said, she's a 3/3. And so she
lords. She does.
She does lord.
What other cards? Give me examples of other cards.
Boneyard Parlay is a great example of a trap.
But doesn't that seem... yeah, okay. I'm on board with that one.
Yeah. So for those who don't know, you basically get to like Factor Fiction a graveyard.
Pretty much.
And you get to keep whatever pile your opponent gives you.
And you put those into the battlefield.
Yep. So, but it costs 7 mana.
Yeah.
And it's sorcery speed.
5 colorless, 2 black.
Yep. So for something like that, it needs to be in like a ramp deck so you can have enough mana to be able to cast it. Well, it's just not enough support really for something like Boneyard Parlay. And on top of that, it's sorcery speed. So even if you are able to cast it, your opponent then has the ability to completely time walk you by blowing up the board the next turn, or counter spelling you or something like that. It doesn't have that additional ability of it can't be countered or anything like that.
I would consider, along this same line of conversation, I would consider a card like Urza's Ruinous Blast to be a trap card.
I would agree, especially in this current meta.
Right.
When
it lures you in.
Yep. The previous meta, before Guilds released, it was good because there was a lot of legends, and it was a very legend focused set.
Agreed.
Now, however, I would agree that it's a trap card because you can just go so wide. You'll kill your opponent's legends before they are even able to get to 5 mana to cast this.
Yeah, most of the time it's a very straightforward, aggro-driven, dual-colored decks that are dominating the meta right now.
And I would even say
intentionally designed.
I would even say all of the legendary sorceries are trap cards.
I do love Yawgmoth's
Vile Offering.
Oh, God.
Yeah,
I love that card. I want to be able to play that card so badly.
Yep.
WotC design team, if you're listening, I want more cards like that.
And then we also even have like Planeswalkers in this category too. So we have Jaya Ballard. She is also a trap because she seems good. You get 3 mana to cast an instant or sorcery for a +1. You also get the +1 and super loot your hand, which seems really good. And then her minus ability, her ultimate, allows you to basically pass in flames.
Yeah.
For the rest of the game.
Yeah, but she's incredibly difficult to resolve.
Right. She's got 3 red mana in her casting cost.
Yeah.
And then on top of that, she doesn't protect herself. There's no way for her to once you resolve her, if they even have 1 creature, if you don't have another spell in your hand to blow up that creature, well, she's just gone.
Yeah.
So she's also a trap card.
I've never built a deck with her in it.
Yep. The closest thing that I came to building with her was when Hollow One was around.
Yeah.
It's because you could cast her super loot and then cast a Hollow One for free. That was something that I was kind of throwing around. But
I remember that. I remember that deck.
I just couldn't quite get it to work.
Okay. How about those that shall not be named?
So the unplayable cards. So rarity for this doesn't matter. So when we say unplayable, we don't even mean the commons that are obviously bad.
We mean does not get played in standard.
Right. So cards like Old Growth Dryads. I know I was kind of like gushing on that a little bit last podcast, but the effect that you get to give your opponent a land is bad.
Yeah, new Rogue Elephant sounds good, doesn't it? Right? 3/3 for 1 green. Sounds good. Unplayable card.
Yep.
You know what I think is just, and I know that you and I have covered this before, what I think is just a totally unplayable card, Sphinx's Decree.
Oh my God. That card is awful. That card is absolutely awful.
There are times where I look at that card and think that maybe I could start a fire in my fireplace with it and be just fine. Of course, I would never burn a Magic card. It's a respect thing. I'd feed it to a hamster before I did that. But there's...
Oh, I burn a 5th copy of this all day.
Just remove it from the rotation.
So
cleaning up old money.
So another card that we have right now in standard is Isolate. So that card is just stone cold unplayable in standard because it may be better in like an older format where the 1 mana basically it says 1 white exile target non-land permanent that costs 1 mana.
Yes.
So this could be good in say like Legacy, maybe.
It's probably great in Legacy in some way.
Mm-hmm. But maybe in Modern against like Death Shadow or something like that.
Maybe.
But really, it's a pretty stone unplayable card. The only reason I could see them printing this is if they're going to be printing some 1 mana something or other that's going to be so overpowered in the coming sets that they needed to have a safety valve for it. Otherwise, it's just a terrible card.
I'm going to go ahead and lump Mist Caller into the unplayables right now, though that'll probably get bumped up into a sleeper status as we see other decks doing some of these other things, right?
Yep.
There's clearly a purpose for that card. Probably has something to do with other formats. It may get a shine in standard, but I will tell you this. After cracking 3 boxes of Guilds of Ravnica, I got too many miscolors.
So hopefully that kind of gave you guys an idea of what we mean.
Some food for thought.
Yeah, some food for thought about, what constitutes a staple versus a playable versus a sleeper versus a trap and the stone cold unplayable.
If you have other examples of staples, sleepers, traps, unplayable cards, even the playable cards that you think maybe aren't getting the attention that they deserve, drop us a comment in the bottom of this podcast.
So, I also
before we go, let's touch on this. This is a big social event.
Yeah. So for those who don't know, there's an artist boycott going on right now, for MagicFest, which is kind of the new Grand Prix for next year.
Yeah.
So
run by Channel Fireball, right?
Correct.
Okay.
What's going on is basically the artists, they used to receive benefits for,
like what?
They used to receive free airfare, free hotel service. They used to get lunch times.
For drawing some stupid pictures.
I know, right? Who would have thought? They used to get an area to where they could put their gear when they had to get up and get a break to keep their gear secure. Okay. And so they also would get a large table to be able to have all their stuff and sell some prints and things like that. But basically,
seems fair.
It seemed fair, right? Because they were guests. They were like guests of honor that were invited to these events.
Seems completely fair.
Well, unfortunately, Channel Fireball decided to instead treat them as vendors. Now they have to pay,
covering a majority of their own costs.
Yep, they have to pay to enter. They have to pay for their hotel service. They have to pay for. They get a small table and they have to upgrade.
Sounds like it's pretty difficult to break even in a scenario like that.
It definitely is. And in fact, they weren't necessarily even breaking even before, right?
I would probably spend my time in more gainful pursuits.
Mm-hmm. And then on top of that, artists were also being asked to do drawing workshops and drawing classes with no compensation. I don't even like. That's like asking a photographer, "Hey, can you photograph my wedding for free?" Right? Like that's.
Didn't you photograph my wedding for free?
Well, yeah, but you're my buddy.
Oh, so. Yeah. Okay. All right. So just always got to play the advocate.
So. It's one of those things where, like you take your car to a car mechanic and it's like, hey, can you, here's this part. Can you put it in here for free for me? Well, no, you got to pay the person for their service.
Did you see the response that Channel Fireball issued
I did.
It was brought to us by the Manosaurs.
Yeah, I briefly glanced through it. The big thing that was a takeaway from that was they no longer have to pay to go there, which is great. It should have been that way to begin with. They also are going to be given a large table, which is great. That's how it should be. They're also going to get their lunch break. And there was one other thing I can't quite remember. They're going to get decent hotel service.
500 rooms to 1,000 plus rooms, those kinds of things. Yeah. I think that even after the response, that what we're kind of getting from the community is that they're kind of just reaffirming some of the things that the artists were saying. It is not giving them all of the things that they were used to back, and maybe it never will be that way again. Okay. Yep. Maybe what we're going to see is the incursion of much larger corporate sponsorships into these events. And that may be the business play for some of these events, is to try to get larger corporate sponsorships involved,
which could then supplement.
Yeah, it's about growing the brand. And when you have those sponsorships, you could fire that money back at the artists.
Right.
It might turn into a situation where you could actually pay them to be there.
Right.
You might be able to compensate them. So there may be a plan in all this. I don't know. I don't really want to debate it. They're free to run their events the way that they do. All in all, I think Channel Fireball does a pretty good job at their Grand Prix events.
And I also have a couple ideas that we could do to be able to kind of fix the situation without having to shell out to larger corporations or anything like that for corporate sponsorships. You could charge all Grand Prix visitors a one-time fee to cover the additional costs.
Sure.
So currently, for those who don't know, you can just go to a Grand Prix and not have to pay an entry fee. The only time you pay an entry fee is when you participate in the main event and some of the side events.
Mm-hmm.
So if you just go there to meet your artist, well, you can just walk right in. Well, charging like, say, $5, $10, $20 for an entry fee could be a good way to offset some of those costs to be able to provide some of these benefits to the artist as a thank you for showing up.
$3.
Right. Yeah. Even for the people who are then participating in the events, maybe that cost, this was something that Saffron Olive thought of, could be deducted from their main entry fee or their main event entry fee. Something like that.
Sure.
Another,
make them pay $5 and give them a booster pack as they cross the threshold.
Sure. Another idea is to charge a $1 fee for something that's typically free, like a free side event. So like a free Commander game or something like that instead would be $1 to play.
Nice. That's a really good idea.
Yeah. And then all of a sudden, all that money can just go to help
show up to play a Commander game there.
Right.
Yeah.
And then another one would be to just increase the cost of the tournament itself to cover the costs. But
sure.
I mean, that one's a little bit hit or miss because, we as Magic players don't like to spend more money.
I have no problem dropping $100 to play in a main event.
So, and if it's $105 to play in the main event or $120, whatever it ends up.
It's planned. It's calculated. I'm there for a reason, and that's to whip all of you. Just kidding.
And then not really. The last thing is that just WotC just covers it as a cost of doing business, right? So they are already investing a lot of money and time into these events, and if having the artists there is a value add, well, then paying the artists or giving them these benefits should just be factored into the cost of doing the business.
Agreed.
And I know Channel Fireball is technically the ones putting on these events.
From a business standpoint, this is simple overhead.
Right.
What do I need to make money?
Right.
And then you set the baseline. That's what you charge.
And if Channel Fireball needs help negotiating with hotels and things like that, I'm sure that WotC or Wizards of the Hasbro has people that can help negotiate these rates.
No question about it.
To get some cheaper hotel stuff. So those are just some ideas that could happen
get
to
the
help.
Red lines written, get the contract signed, boys. This is pretty simple. It's about taking care of everybody, growing the brand, and growing the community of Magic the Gathering, providing a place where people can go to not only support the game, but support the people who make that game possible.
Yep.
It's about inclusion. It's not about exclusion.
Yep.
Mages.
And basically, my takeaway from this is there are just a few things that just should not happen. And one of those things is that the artists should not be considered as vendors. They are special guests. It's like only probably about 10 to 15% of the player base comes up to say hi to them.
Of course.
Right?
We did. I went and bought a couple unique tokens and got them signed last time I was there.
They're very much like an actor from a TV show going to like Comic-Con or something like that.
You see their names on your favorite cards.
Right. The vendors also should not be asked to pay any more to help cover this cost.
Agreed.
Because they're already paying a ton of money to be there.
It's about equity.
Yep. And so if they then have to pay more money to be there to help cover this cost, they're not going to have any profit, and they're not going to want to show up. So that's just kind of my takeaways from it. All in all, I think Channel Fireball can do better. It just shouldn't have happened to begin with, and it's a shame that it did, because there's quite a few well-known artists who signed the petition to join the boycott. It would be a shame if they didn't show up.
Boycotts don't last forever.
Yeah, it's true. It's true.
I think that they'll find a way to get all parties involved, satiated, happy, back to what we do best, which is celebrating the game of Magic in a positive way, in a community light, as opposed to creating divides with one another. And the artists are so critically important to the fundamentals of the game. It tells the story. It is the history of the game, right? We get to see the storybook unfold through the art, the interactions in between certain cards, and the art enforces those interactions and is all tied back into the story. And ultimately, supporting the artists is not really something that should come into question. The idea that we wouldn't be offering them just civility in some of this is really disappointing to me. All in all, I think Channel Fireball will come to their senses with some of this, and hopefully things get worked out and the boycott or the strike drops pretty shortly, because it'd be a shame to start going to GP events and not have the ability to meet some of your favorite artists of some of the key and most important Magic cards in the game. What do you think? We think we can leave it there?
I think we leave it there. Yep.
Okay, that sounds good. Well, thanks everybody for joining us for episode 103 of the Main Phase podcast with Land Say Go. I'm Jeremy.
I'm Debo.
And join us next Thursday for episode 104.